Okay, so first I want to mention, when I say parties, I'm referring to the song Parties Are for Losers, and when I say Baffle, I'm referring to the series as a whole. So, let's start with some context. Baffle is a fanfiction of, or rather was inspired by a book called The Roadside Picnic. The story takes place in Eastern Europe, where there is this zone that was created by God knows what, and that is filled with valuable artifacts and deadly traps. No one's allowed in, and the people that do go in to hunt for these artifacts, called stalkers, tend to give birth to people with special powers, known as mutants. The severity of these mutations can range anywhere from simple albinism to telepathy. Baffle chooses to use the zone as more of a background to a teenage drama set in a city bordering the zone, inspired greatly by contemporary Eastern Slavic culture. Because of this setting, it differentiates itself from other zone-related media by focusing more on the mutants than the zone. In Baffle, mutants are usually given borderline superpowers, while in Roadside it is more clearly genetic defects, so in the book they are presented as something much more complicated and frankly, much more fucked up. With that out of the way, what I consider to be the opening of Baffle is covered by 3 songs, which give us the 3 relevant perspectives on the first 3 events of the series. They take place at roughly the same time, so I figured I'd put them in one video. Also, I want to get through this part quick, the story only really picks up around strike 3. The first song is, of course, Parties, and it shows us the perspective of Yuri Beletsky. Yura is in the first part of the song introduced as a teenager that has kind of given up on his future and so spends most of his nights going out with his kind of maybe girlfriend, Alexandra Kazarina. I've personally considered Yura to be the protagonist of the series, although this is one of those stories where there's like 4 characters that could be considered the protagonist. Funnily enough, now I think about it, if you were to present the story from almost any other perspective, he would probably be the villain. Also, real quick, do Russian surnames change based on the gender of the person? I don't know, maybe. In the next part, the lyrics mention how Yura hates the world around him, but that some inside voice tells him that that's normal, and so he keeps pushing on, day after day, through his meaningless and drug-filled life. Next, there is a shot of a couple other kids in Yura's and Sanya's gang who I think might have had their designs inspired by other Vocaloids, going to a bar called Molodzyozhny, or however the fuck you pronounce that. From Russian, Molodzyozhny roughly translates to youth. Then, we first see Yura's ability to sense anomalies, so mutants and artifacts from the zone. At the time of writing this, I don't believe it is clear why he has this power, but because of it, we get our first introduction to Katya. With The Loser Looks Into the Eyes of the Monster, the art style changes to express Yura sensing that there is something wrong with this random girl, and he contemplates calling the cops. He then decides, a lapse in reason I figure can be pretty fun, and so, the party goes on and on. In the verse after that, he describes himself to Katya, saying, "My future is on the rails of freight trains, not daisy chains." He believes his future will be successful, as I believe working on freight trains probably won't leave you begging on the streets, but he just doesn't see it as the way he wants to spend his life. At this point of the story, he is a blatant pessimist, but in Katya, he's now faced with another person that has their future essentially screwed, remembering that she will probably have to be in the run for the rest of her life from the lab, but who chose to be optimistic about it. He probably expects Katya to be shocked by the way he forsakes his own life, but she just smiles and tells him that's such an uncool thing to say. Side note, Katya's mutation is a dangerous one, and triggers when she gets stressed, and that is probably why she developed a speech pattern so full of childish mannerisms. In the lyricless part of the video, Yura introduces Katya to Sanya, they hang out for a bit, and then Sergei, Sanya's overprotective older brother and military vet, comes to pick his sister up, but on the way notices Katya's signs of mutation. The previous exchange changes Yura's perception of Katya drastically, since he finally found someone that might be able to relate his situation, but has still picked a more optimistic way to live their life, and after a while he breaks down crying in her arms asking, "Am I lying or living a lie?" To this, she comforts him with, "What's the point of forsaking the future? You can change it into whatever you please." She is seeding into his brain a more optimistic ideology, telling him that he can in fact change his future. With this, he fully decides to not turn her in, even though he needs the cash, and instead takes her to Sanya's place where she can hide since Sanya is also a mutant and her home is practically a stalker den. However, Sergei grows suspicious and calls the police, just out of safety, and unexpectedly summons the military which shows up to capture Katya, after which we get to see her mutation. When she gets put under a lot of stress, her flesh begins to expand rapidly. She prefers to not trigger this power often since she can't really expand the flesh and having it removed is very painful. She gets taken back to the lab, with Yuri and Sanya looking on as Sergei counts the bills. Her final words to them are, even though this mindless self-indulgence was fun, the party ends at the break of dawn. Before we begin this song, False Disposition contains a lot of symbolism that doesn't become apparent until you're much deeper down the pathful rabbit hole, so much of the lyrical depth might go out the window if you're listening to it for the first time. And that's why I'm here. In the first proper part of the song, we are introduced to Alexandra and Sergei Kazarin, brother and sister, with Sergei being so traumatized by the death of their parents inside of the zone that he has locked Sanya in the apartment and almost never lets her out. Then we see Yuri, the blonde punk that Sergei hired to become a stalker and to tutor Sanya on certain subjects that Sergei can't. Although, much of the time spent tutoring is just spent flirting behind Sergei's back, and finally escalates into Sanya asking Yuri to help her sneak out of the house and go clubbing. She has the time of her life there, until Yuri ditches her for some other girl, and she is left alone behind the club to kick trash cans while repeating Sergei's words in her mind. Then, Yuri shows back up, drunkenly tells her that he hates this town, and starts hitting trash cans alongside her with a bat. The lyrics during this part are parallels to the part where they escape Sanya's home in the beginning, and there are some interesting comparisons to be made. Most notably to me, at first she says that the walls around her sheltered heart have begun to break and fall apart, but then she says that she won't ever bear her foolish heart. Like I mentioned, there are some yet to be explored symbolisms in this song, and Sanya's heart is brought up often as the story progresses, and Sanya eventually becomes the character of duality, torn between the safety offered by Sergei and the rebellious path offered by Yuri, and already now we can see the seeds of that duality, with her calling herself sheltered one minute and foolish another. When the song says that Yuri's smile is brighter than the most relentless sun, that's a reference to him becoming blinded by ambition and spite later on, with probably the most comparable line coming in Strike Free, a song sung from Sergei's perspective, from which probably the most memorable quote is, "Blinded by the sun, you spin the barrel of a fully loaded gun," with that last part being a reference to Russian roulette. "I'll paint my face with blood and dirt" is called back to Occam's razor, though I don't think there's much more to it other than the idea that Yura is rubbing off some of his rebellious spirit onto Sanya. And, of course, the reference to how dangerous that rebellious spirit can be. "The chain is broken, I have no right to feel this hurt" is referring to how she got freed from Sergei now, and yet for some reason still feels hurt in some way. Like I said, a character of duality, and the motif of chains is brought up again most notably in 100 Epitaphs, but that's for another day. While we're here and discussing symbolism, I'd encourage you to keep an eye on that bat as more of the story gets released. It is one of the most prominent pieces of visual symbolism in the series. I strongly suspect it will come to play a big part in the ending of the series, so I can't really talk about the exact symbolism regarding it beyond the fact that it appears to have been passed down from Yuri to Sanya, and that it is often shown when the story is connected to their relationship. I need to write these sentences shorter, man. After this bit, there is a somewhat long instrumental section. I don't know very much about music, but listen to this part. To me, this part is very similar to one of Fairy's not path-related works, at least not to be confirmed ones, called Happy. As the lab's funding is pulled back, its scope must be regressed. In practice, that means the most dangerous and hard-to-contain mutants have to be executed. Katya is the next mutant in the chair, and her executioner is Dmitri. He's a dangerous mutant, just like her, but because of his useful telekinetic powers, he usually receives more privileges than most. Still, the fear he inspired in scientists around him was apparent, and not for no reason, as Dmitri suddenly snaps and breaks himself and Katya out of the lab. After stealing some clothes, the two of them break up, since Katya wants to see the world and experience her newfound freedom, while Dmitri is insistent on staying low, convinced that this isn't a world fit for mutants like them. As they break up, Katya vows to prove him wrong. Meeting Yuri at a bar, he tells her that he can ask a friend of his to keep her safe. He then asks how bad her mutation is, to which she refuses to respond. As the military blasts through the door, her mutation activates, and she shows off the horrors of her mutation. As she gets captured, she realizes that Dmitri was right. This isn't a world fit for people like her. With the final words of the song, she hopes that in time that Yuri spent with her, he realized that throwing his life away on meaningless things is pointless, and that he doesn't lose his sight of the bright future he could have. Anyway, the last part of Full's disposition mirrors the opening pretty closely, which is why I didn't want to bring it up earlier. After the events of parties, Sanya catches up to Yuri and he leaves on his first trip into the zone, from which he might well never return. There's a stupid thing I used to say, pathetic ones like me lose before we've joined the game, that's really lame, is an interesting line. With the word lame, and with Sanya later calling him cool guy, it's clear that some of what he heard from Katya really got to him. She told him that he can make of the future whatever he wants, and so, he goes into one of the most dangerous and illegal places on Earth, and later on, he'll do what Katya would have wanted, take his life into his own hands and save her from the lab.